Snow powdered the city like sifted sugar the night Mrs. Lillian Hartwell stepped into the marquee of Blakely's winter ball, though she doubted anyone would notice the weather when her presence alone threatened to sour the air. Behind her, the footman shut the carriage door with a soft thud, sealing her fate for the evening. She gathered her modest gray silk skirts, breathed once for courage, and entered the blaze of chandeliers that made every jewel glitter, every silk gown shimmer, and every whisper sharpen like a blade. The orchestra played a waltz too grand for her quiet steps, but she carried herself with dignity. She had learned long ago that a bowed head invited sharper cruelty. Lillian moved through the gilded hall with the grace of someone who wished only to take up as little space as possible. Her employer's family had insisted she attend as their companion, a gesture presented as kindness but more truthfully an obligation. Someone had to hold the invitations, fetch smelling salts, gather shawls, and politely melt into corners. Yet the moment she crossed the threshold, she felt the sting of eyes assessing her gown, her widow's pin, her posture, her very right to breathe beneath so many crystal lights. Is that her? The governess widow? The Hartwell woman, the one whose husband died and left nothing but debts? I heard she was invited out of charity. Imagine being pitted into a ballroom. The voices floated around her like icy feathers. She kept walking, chin gently lifted, though her pulse fluttered beneath her lace collar. A lady in emerald silk stepped directly into her path, fanning herself with idle cruelty. Oh, pardon me, the woman said sweetly, eyes sweeping Lillian's aged gown. I did not realize they allowed companions to wander unattended. How progressive of the Marquis. A soft titter followed. Lillian lowered her eyes in a restrained curtsy, the gesture taught in better days when she had been the young wife of a hopeful clerk, not yet the pale shadow of a woman navigating London on the fumes of dignity. The humiliation pricked her skin. She imagined it glowing there, visible to all. But something else pierced the air, a gaze. Heavy, assessing, quiet as winter falling on stone. Across the ballroom stood the Duke of Ashford, His Grace Alastair Hawthorne, a figure of somber elegance in black and silver. He was tall, carved by grief rather than age, and watched the room with the wary stillness of a man long accustomed to betrayal. For reasons she could not fathom, his eyes were fixed upon her, not with curiosity nor disdain, but with a kind of solemn recognition, an echo of seeing another wounded soul in a merciless room. Lillian looked away first, unsettled. The evening only grew harsher. Lady Maribel Stanton arrived like a storm cloaked in crimson velvet, her beauty as sharp as her ambition. She swept across the ballroom toward the Duke, but upon noticing his brief glance toward Lillian, something cold flickered in her eyes. She veered instead toward the widow. "My dear Mrs. Hartwell," Maribel purred, trapping her between a column and a cluster of ladies pretending not to listen, "how industrious you are. Already seeking the notice of eligible men, even in mourning colors." Lillian stiffened. "I seek nothing, my lady, save a quiet corner." "A quiet corner rarely leads to prosperous connections," Maribel murmured loud enough for a circle of curious ears. "But perhaps that is the extent of your ambition." Before Lillian could respond, her foot caught the edge of a rug as she attempted to withdraw. She stumbled, heart lurching, until a firm hand caught her glove. She looked up. The Duke himself stood before her, steady as oak, his hand enveloping hers. The shock of his presence disarmed her so completely she forgot to breathe. "Are you harmed, madam?" His voice was low, smooth, tinged with something unguarded. "And no, your grace." She tried to free her hand, but he did not release it at once. His lingering touch felt less like impropriety and more like a silent rebellion against the room. He turned his cool gaze upon Lady Maribel, and something in his expression made her flinch a fraction. "Lady Stanton," he said mildly, "your concern for Mrs. Hartwell seems excessive." Maribel forced a smile. "I merely wish to ensure the Duke was not misled by—" "By what?" Alastair asked softly, dangerously. "A lady seeking balance after an unfortunate misstep?" The tone carried weight without raising volume, and the group around them dissolved like startled birds. Lillian withdrew her hand at last, her cheeks burning. "Your Grace," she whispered, steady but trembling beneath the surface, "I thank you, but I would not wish for my presence to burden your evening." "A burden," he replied, "is often merely an unspoken truth wearing another name." She could not fathom what he meant. Before she could inquire, he bowed with impeccable formality and departed, though she felt the imprint of his gaze long after he disappeared into the swirl of dancers. Lillian retreated from the ballroom toward the balcony, needing air. The cold night met her like a balm. Snow drifted gently through lantern light, softening the echo of laughter behind her. For a fleeting moment, she allowed the vulnerability she had held at bay to tremble free. She wondered if there would ever be a place in the world where she did not have to brace herself against whispers. She did not notice the Duke standing beneath the archway until he stepped from shadow. "Mrs. Hartwell," he said quietly, "you should not be alone in this chill." She startled. "Forgive me, Your Grace. I intended no impropriety." "There is none," he said. His breath curled in the cold air. "I followed only to ensure you were unharmed." She folded her hands to hide their trembling. "I am accustomed to such evenings." "I observed that," he replied, a sorrowful edge in his tone. "It is a strange thing, is it not? To walk among people who speak of kindness while offering so little of it." His words were too perceptive, too intimate for a man she barely knew. She lowered her gaze, heart flickering with an emotion that frightened her. "You see too much, Your Grace," she murmured. "And you endure too much," he countered. The words hung between them, dangerous, sincere, undeniably human. Before anything more could be said, a flurry of approaching voices forced them apart. Lillian curtsied hastily and slipped inside. Whispered gossip awaited her immediately. The Duke was alone with the widow. The widow? Her pulse stuttered. She hurried through the hallways, seeking escape from the rising tide of scandal. She found her carriage waiting. As she stepped inside, the muffled music fading behind her, she allowed one whispered confession to escape her lips. Not for the Duke, not for society, but for herself. "I cannot survive another winter like this." Unseen from the courtyard archway, Alistair watched her carriage roll into the snowy night, a man who sensed the fragile beginning of something he did not yet understand, but could not ignore. The morning after the winter ball dawned pale and brittle, as if the sun itself hesitated to warm a city too enamored with its own coldness. Mrs. Lillian Hartwell sat by the window of her employer's townhouse, mending a frayed cuff with fingers that still trembled faintly from the humiliations of the previous night. She had told herself that sleep would bring distance, that morning light would banish memory, yet the whispers clung to her more tightly than her widow's shawl. Every glance she had endured, every sneer half hidden behind a lace fan, returned with cruel clarity. A knock interrupted her thoughts. The footman entered, holding a small parcel wrapped in cream paper and bound with black ribbon, the sort of elegant restraint only nobility could afford. "For you, madam," he said, though confusion flickered across his features. Companions did not receive such packages. Lillian frowned. "Are you certain? It must be a mistake." "No mistake, madam. Delivered with instructions it be placed directly in your hands." He withdrew, leaving her with the parcel and a growing sense of unease. With careful fingers, she untied the ribbon and eased open the paper. Inside lay a pair of lambskin gloves, soft as breath, dyed a warm winter brown. Beneath them rested a single pressed winter rose, its pale petals preserved with meticulous care. Her breath caught, unsure whether to feel warmed or threatened. No note accompanied the gift, only exquisite handwriting on the wrapping, elegant strokes she had glimpsed on calling cards belonging to aristocrats. But she knew, with unsettling certainty, whose hand had instructed this offering. His Grace, the Duke of Ashford. The knowledge left her suspended between gratitude and dread. Kindness from such a man carried weight too heavy for a woman of her station. She folded the gloves back into the paper, intending to return them, but a second knock stole the chance away. This time it was her employer, Mrs. Pembroke, her expression tight with that particular blend of gentility and embarrassment reserved for conversations one would rather avoid. "My dear Mrs. Hartwell," she began, stepping into the room with careful grace, "I fear some unfortunate rumors are circulating this morning." Lillian's stomach tightened. "Rumors, madam?" Mrs. Pembroke clasped her hands. "About last night. About your proximity to certain gentlemen of rank." Lillian felt her heart constrict. "I was merely seeking air, madam. The Duke approached to ensure my well-being. Nothing improper transpired." Mrs. Pembroke nodded in sympathetic acknowledgement. "I believe you. However, society's perception rarely aligns with truth. It would be best if you kept to yourself for a few days, perhaps avoided public gatherings until this tide settles." The word tide seemed generous. It felt more like a flood. And the gloves resting on her lap suddenly burned like forged iron. "I understand," Lillian whispered. Her employer hesitated, then added gently, "Some have said the Duke showed particular interest. I pray such talk does not bring you trouble." Lillian bowed her head, mortified. She wanted to explain, to insist she had no designs on any nobleman, least of all the Duke, whose life existed in a realm entirely untouchable to hers. But the moment Mrs. Pembroke left, Lillian hid the gloves in her drawer, as though concealing evidence of a crime she had not committed. That afternoon she accompanied the Pembroke family to a charity luncheon, an obligation she could not refuse without drawing more suspicion. The event was held in Lady Fairchild's conservatory, a magnificent room of ironwork and glass where camellias bloomed despite the winter frost. Lillian lingered near the far corner, trying to disappear among the towering ferns, but whispers traveled swiftly through the warm air. "Did you hear? The Duke sent her gloves." "Gloves? They say she spent half the evening alone with him. How disgraceful. A widow and so soon fishing for favor." Lillian's throat tightened and she stepped deeper into the greenery, willing her pulse to quiet. A voice, steady and low, broke through the murmur behind her. "Mrs. Hartwell." She turned. The Duke of Ashford stood a few paces away, framed by white camellias, the winter light filtering through the glass above casting a softened glow upon his solemn features. His presence drew her breath away with the same startling force as when he had caught her hand in the ballroom. "Your Grace," she managed, wondering how such a man could move with such silent certainty. "I hope to find you," he said. "I feared you might be suffering consequences you did not earn." His words, so precise and considerate, pierced her defenses. "I would not have society misunderstand your intentions," she said softly. "Your assistance last night has already stirred more talk than I can counter." His jaw tightened. "Then allow me to clarify matters." Before she could protest, he stepped closer, still respectable, still proper, yet undeniably intent. He raised a hand toward a nearby camellia bloom, touching a petal with the lightest brush of his gloved fingers. "This flower blooms in winter," he said quietly. "Fragile in appearance, yet stronger than everything around it. I thought of you when I saw it." Her breath faltered. Such a comparison, spoken with the restraint of a man who feared revealing too much, sent heat to her cheeks. "Your Grace, you must not." "I must," he interrupted, though his tone remained gentle. "I regret that my actions have caused you undue attention." A rustle behind them signaled observers. Lillian's heart lurched. Two ladies stood frozen, their eyes bulging with shock, hands clutching each other like witnesses to treason. The Duke noticed them too. His expression hardened just slightly, and he inclined his head to the women with courtly coldness. But the damage was already done. Lillian felt the tremor of impending scandal trickle into her bones. "You should not be seen speaking with me alone," she whispered urgently. "I beg you to leave before matters grow worse." He hesitated only a moment, long enough for longing and regret to flicker in his gaze. Then he bowed, too deeply for a man of his rank, and departed through the ferns, vanishing into the throng of aristocrats who parted instinctively around him. The women wasted no time. "A secret rendezvous, did you see the way he stood?" She had him ensnared among the camellias like some tragic heroine. "Maribel will be livid." The name struck Lillian like a blow. Lady Maribel Stantonshire was not the sort one survived unscathed. By evening, the gossip had spread through London drawing rooms like wildfire. Servants repeated it before fires. Carriage drivers swapped embellished versions at the stables. And somewhere in her lavish townhouse, Lady Maribel undoubtedly stoked the rumor with venomous delight. Lillian sat at her small writing desk, staring at the hidden gloves in her drawer as though they might speak. But they offered neither comfort nor clarity, only complication. Across the city, in a dim library thick with the scent of old leather and smoke, the Duke sat in silence while his cousin Edmund stood near the hearth. "You look troubled," Edmund remarked. Alistair stared into the fire. "I have 7 days," he said at last, voice quiet as a confession. 7 days to marry or I lose Ashford entirely." Edmund froze, shock eclipsing his usual levity. 7 days? Then you must choose at once." The Duke's hand tightened around the arm of his chair. "And the only woman whose presence does not suffocate me now believes I have ruined her." The fire crackled, a single ember drifting upward like a dying hope, and the room fell into somber stillness as the weight of inevitability settled upon the Duke's shoulders. The invitation arrived on a morning washed gray with mist, as though the world itself held its breath. Mrs. Lillian Hartwell found it upon the breakfast tray, a thick ivory envelope sealed with black wax bearing the hawthorn crest. The footman who delivered it offered no explanation, only a stiff bow that revealed nothing of what he thought of delivering a personal summons from a duke to a widow of humble standing. Her heart lurched. She stared at the seal long enough for the tea beside her to cool. Accepting the invitation would stoke the flames of gossip already spreading through London, yet refusing him felt dangerously close to ingratitude, even disrespect. The Duke of Ashford was not a man one dismissed lightly, not even in rumor. And beyond propriety, there remained the memory of his gaze in the conservatory, steady, solemn, imploring in a way she had not known a man of such rank capable of looking at someone like her. Her fingers broke the seal before she fully decided to do so. "Mrs. Hartwell, your presence is humbly requested at Ashford House at your earliest convenience. Matters of importance must be discussed. I assure you that your dignity and comfort shall be safeguarded. With respect, Alastair Hawthorne, Duke of Ashford." Her pulse quickened. Matters of importance. Such formality cloaked something more personal, something urgent. Within the hour, a carriage was arranged. Her employer, uneasy but unwilling to offend a duke, permitted her absence with a strained smile that betrayed an undercurrent of fear. Lillian dressed in her most modest attire, a navy wool gown with a high collar, and wrapped herself in her shawl as if it were armor. She reminded herself this meeting was likely to end whatever misunderstandings lingered in society's merciless mouth. And yet, a tremor of anticipation betrayed her calm facade. Ashford House rose from the fog like a mansion sculpted from winter itself. Tall windows reflected the muted sky, and frost clung to the iron gates as though reluctant to let them open for her. The butler greeted her with a bow so deep it unsettled her more than rudeness might have done. She was escorted through quiet corridors lined with ancestral portraits whose stern eyes followed her approach. But the Duke was not waiting in the grand drawing room. Instead, the butler led her through to the gardens beyond the glass doors, where winter lay in delicate repose. He stood among the frost-touched hedges, hands clasped behind his back, his black coat stark against the pale landscape. Snowflakes drifted onto his shoulders, dissolving as though the cold dared not linger on him. When he turned, the controlled tension in his posture revealed a man bearing more weight than his rank demanded. "Mrs. Hartwell," he said, bowing with a solemnity she felt unworthy to receive. "Thank you for coming. I feared you might refuse." She gathered her composure. "Your Grace, I could not deny a summons so earnestly written. Though I confess, I do not understand the urgency. Then allow me to explain." He gestured to a stone path winding through the winter garden. "Will you walk with me?" She nodded. They strolled among bare branches adorned with crystals of ice. No other soul ventured into the garden. Their footsteps alone disturbed the snow. The quiet wrapped around them, making every word feel weighted, inescapable. "I owe you an apology," he began. "My actions have brought unwarranted attention upon you. Society's appetite for cruelty seems boundless." She clasped her hands tighter within her shawl. "Your Grace, it is not your fault. People misunderstand kindness, especially when shown to those of lower station." "No," he said firmly. "This particular storm is mine, and it is time you understood why." She glanced at him, surprised by the strain in his voice. Something deeper stirred beneath those calm, aristocratic features. "My father," the Duke continued, "left a condition in his will. A cruel one, though I trust his intentions were misguided rather than malicious." He inhaled sharply, breath clouding in the cold. "I am to marry before my 35th birthday or relinquish all rights to Ashford." Lillian stopped walking. The winter garden fell silent. "Your Grace, that is mere days away." "7," he said quietly. "7 days remain." Shock rippled through her. A duke without property? Without the estate that supported hundreds of tenants and families? It was unthinkable. Surely there must be an alternative, legal recourse. "There is none," he said. "The will is ironclad, and my cousin waits eagerly to inherit. A man whose negligence would ruin Ashford within a year." Understanding dawned with a heaviness that pressed upon her ribs. "Then you must marry quickly." His gaze found hers, dark, earnest, stripped of all pretense. "I would ask you," he said softly, "to consider standing with me." The words struck her like a gust of winter wind. She stepped back without meaning to, clutching her shawl. "Me?" she whispered. "Your Grace, you cannot mean." "I do." His voice remained calm, but she sensed a tremor beneath it. "This is not a proposal born of romance or youthful fancy. It is a plea made by a man fighting to protect what countless lives depend upon. Yet," and here his expression softened, "I would not insult you by suggesting this is purely transactional. I have come to admire your courage, your honesty, your grace under cruelty. You do not bend to malice. And his voice faltered, unusual in its vulnerability. "I find peace in your presence, Mrs. Hartwell. Something I have not felt for a very long time." Her breath shivered. She wanted to speak but found no words capable of bridging the gulf between them. A widow with nothing but dignity and a modest wage. A duke with a legacy on the precipice of collapse. It is too sudden, she murmured, eyes downcast. Too great a chasm. I cannot answer lightly. Nor can I enter a union knowing I might be little more than a necessity. He stepped closer, stopping just before propriety would demand she withdraw. I ask not for affection you do not yet feel. Only for a chance, for both of us, to reshape our fates. Together, if you would have the courage. Her eyes lifted to his, drawn by the honesty written there. She saw not power but a man fighting shadows far older than himself. A man whose restraint cracked only when he looked at her. Her hand brushed his sleeve, the faintest whisper of touch. He inhaled sharply, and for one dangerous heartbeat, neither moved away. I need time, she finally whispered. A single night to think. He bowed his head, a gesture of acceptance that felt almost like surrender. You shall have it. Whatever your decision, I will honor it. A carriage awaited her at the garden gate. As Lillian stepped inside, she glanced back through the drifting snow. The Duke stood motionless among the frost-laden branches, watching her depart as though each wheel turn carried away more than hope. If she refuses me, he murmured into the cold air, I deserve it. The carriage door closed, sealing both their fates until morning. Snow thickened over London through the night, falling in soft white curtains that muffled the world into a hush, as though the city waited with bated breath for a single widow's choice. Mrs. Lillian Hartwell lay awake in her narrow bed, the Duke's confession echoing in the quiet like a heartbeat she could not still. 7 days to save Ashford. 7 days to keep hundreds from ruin. And he had looked at her, not as a convenient shield against a cruel will, but as someone who steadied something broken inside him. Yet fear curled through her. She touched the lambskin gloves hidden in her drawer, tracing the seams as though they might speak sense into her turmoil. She had buried once for love. To marry again for necessity felt like trespass upon her own grief. And still, she remembered the Duke's voice in the garden, steady but fraying at the edges, as though he had allowed her to glimpse a wound long concealed. Before dawn stretched its first pale fingers over the rooftops, she rose, dressed, and wrapped herself in her shawl. Clarity had come with the night's silence. She could not erase the dignity of the man who had protected her when others sought to crush her spirit. She had been offered a choice, something life rarely gave her. And she knew with trembling certainty what she must do. By mid-morning the storm had worsened. Carriages crawled through the streets, wheels breaking through drifts. Lillian's carriage reached Ashford House slowly, its lantern dimmed by swirling snow. She stepped out, shivering as wind tugged at her shawl, and approached the grand entrance where 2 footmen rushed to usher her inside. The entrance hall glowed with winter light filtering through tall windows. The Duke stood at the base of the staircase, his posture taut, his jaw set with a tension that betrayed a sleepless night. When he saw her, the mask he wore, one forged through years of restrained composure, fractured. He stepped forward, breath catching almost imperceptibly. Mrs. Hartwell, he said, his voice carefully even, you honor me with your presence. I feared the storm might deter you. The storm, she replied softly, is not the thing capable of frightening me today. A flicker of anxiety crossed his features. Then you have decided. She drew a steadying breath. Your Grace. I have considered every consequence, every whisper, every duty. And I have weighed them against the man I have come to know in these past days. He remained motionless, eyes dark and unguarded. I will stand with you, she said, if you still wish it. For a heartbeat, silence fell like a held breath. Then the Duke exhaled sharply as though a blade had been lifted from his chest. Relief softened his entire frame, leaving him almost vulnerable. He bowed his head, not as a nobleman accepting agreement, but as a man receiving a blessing he had dared not hope for. I am humbled, he murmured, and undeserving. You are neither, she replied, her voice steadier now. You asked me with honesty. I answer with the same. Before either could say more, hurried footsteps echoed from the corridor. Edmund Hawthorne emerged, his expression a mixture of relief and caution. Alistair, forgive my interruption, but word has reached us. Lady Maribel is on her way. And she is not pleased. The Duke's mouth tightened. She would not be. Lillian stiffened. Your Grace, perhaps I should withdraw. No, Alistair said, the single word firm, protective. You will not hide in your own future. Moments later, Lady Maribel Stanton swept into the hall like a crimson storm, her velvet cloak shedding snow as though she brought the blizzard with her. Her eyes landed on Lillian with icy disdain. So it is true, she hissed. You mean to marry her? The Duke stepped forward, his presence commanding enough to silence even Maribel's fury. "Lady Stanton, whatever affection you imagined I bore you was a misunderstanding. Mrs. Hartwell is under my protection and will soon be under my name." Maribel's face hardened, lips trembling with repressed outrage. "She is beneath you." "And yet," Alistair replied coolly, "she carries dignity you cannot fathom." Lillian flinched at the open confrontation, but the Duke reached back, his hand finding hers in a gesture so tender it startled even him. He did not release her. "You wound me with your cruelty, Maribel," he continued, voice soft but sharp as ice. "But you will not touch my future Duchess." The title hung in the air like a spark catching flame. Gasps sounded from servants who had gathered at the edges, their decorum eroded by shock. Maribel drew a sharp breath, eyes glistening with humiliation. She turned abruptly and stormed away, the echo of her boots fading like a dying storm. Lillian's hand trembled in the Duke's. She met his gaze, her voice barely above a whisper. "You should not have said that. It will spread within the hour." "Let it," he answered, tightening his hold. "Truth is a fire. Best to let it burn quickly." The announcement of their impending marriage spread through London's social circles before twilight. Invitations were drafted at once. The ceremony was to take place at dawn, the final day before the Duke's inheritance would be forfeited. Snow deepened, blanketing the world in white silence, as though nature itself insisted upon the intimacy of the moment. That evening, Lillian returned to her small room to prepare what little she needed for the life awaiting her. Her heart beat with a mixture of courage and fear, but something steadier than both guided her hands. She folded her gowns, her shawls, and at last the lambskin gloves. When her fingers brushed the winter rose, she allowed a rare, fragile smile. But as she reached for her cloak, she noticed a slip of paper pushed under her door. No seal, no signature, only a single line written in jagged ink. "If you marry him, you will regret it." The words pulsed with menace, stark against the candlelit room. Her breath caught, fear fluttering cold and sharp beneath her ribs. Someone wished to frighten her, or worse. But she forced herself to stand still, to breathe through the tremor. The Duke had offered her truth, vulnerability, and a future built from shared resolve. Fear alone would not turn her from that path now. She folded the note, tucked it inside her cloak, and whispered into the dim room, "Tomorrow I choose my fate." Outside, snow continued falling, soft, unbroken, relentless, ushering the night toward the dawn of their reckoning. The dawn that should have risen soft and golden broke instead through a storm of white, thick snow sweeping across the city as though the heavens themselves sought to test the resolve of every soul within London. Mrs. Lillian Hartwell stepped from her carriage before Ashford House with her cloak drawn tight, the falling flakes catching in her dark hair. The world was muffled, expectant. Today she was to marry a duke. Today she was to claim a future both terrifying and extraordinary. Yet beneath her determination lingered the memory of the crude warning slipped under her door. "If you marry him, you will regret it." She pressed the note against her palm as she approached the steps. A footman opened the door, bowing her into the grandeur of the entrance hall where candles fought bravely against the dimness of the storm. The great house was quieter than usual, only a handful of guests had managed the treacherous roads. It was, by necessity, a private ceremony, small, solemn, intimate. The Duke stood near the hearth, his broad silhouette illuminated by firelight. When he turned toward her, the tension in his face eased, not entirely, but enough that she felt the warmth of his relief. He walked to her slowly, as though afraid she might disappear in the next gust of wind. "You made it," he breathed. "No storm could keep me away," she replied. But as she slipped the threatening note into his hand, the line between his brows deepened. He read the message with a cold fury she had not seen before, quiet, lethal, tightly bound. "You should have shown me this last night," he said, voice low. "I feared it would trouble you," she murmured. "It troubles me far more that you endured the threat alone." Before she could answer, heavy footsteps approached. Edmund hurried into the hall, his face pale. "Alistair," he whispered urgently. "He is here." "The cousin." The Duke stiffened. Lillian felt the shift in him like a tightening wire. "Where?" Alistair demanded. "In the west corridor." He forced his way in. The Duke's cousin, Lord Benedict Hawthorne, materialized moments later, flanked by two smug-faced associates. He wore a smirk that did not reach his eyes, which glittered with the sharpness of someone finally within reach of long-anticipated triumph. "Cousin," Benedict drawled, glancing pointedly at Lillian. "The morning of your last day as Duke. How poetic that you attempt to resolve your troubles with such unusual haste." Alistair stepped between Benedict and Lillian. "You will not speak to her." "She should hear the truth," Benedict snapped. "He does not want you, madam. He needs you." A desperate man clutching at the nearest solution. Lillian felt the words sting, but the Duke's steady presence anchored her. "Say what you came to say," Alistair replied, voice forged in ice. Benedict threaded his fingers behind his back. "I came to witness your defeat." "Word of a wedding at dawn? Laughable. The courts will challenge it, the Ton will ridicule it, and the scandal surrounding your widow bride will tarnish every shred of credibility you pretend to possess." His gaze flickered toward Lillian. "Especially now that we know she is easily intimidated." "A single note, Anne." He never finished. The force of Alistair's step silenced him more effectively than a blow. "You threatened her," the Duke said, each word heavy enough to shake the room. "You dared to place fear at her door." Benedict's smirk tightened. "I warned her. A necessary kindness, truly. She deserves to know the ruin you will bring upon her." "Enough," Alistair growled. "You will leave Ashford House." "Or what?" Benedict taunted. "You have hours left of authority." Lillian, gathering the remnants of her courage, stepped forward. "Lord Benedict," she said, her voice clear though her hands trembled beneath her cloak, "you speak of ruin as though it were a fate I am too fragile to endure. Yet I have survived poverty, loss, and humiliation delivered by those with far more influence than you. If I stand beside His grace, it will not be because I am intimidated, but because I choose honor over cowardice." The room stilled. Even the storm outside seemed to hush. Alistair turned to her with eyes darkened by something tender, something fierce. Benedict, however, recoiled, his smugness faltering. "You mistake boldness for wisdom," he hissed. "And you mistake malice for authority," she answered softly. Benedict's face flushed. "Then you are fools, both of you. But do as you please. When the clock strikes the final hour, all of this," he gestured to the grand hall, "will be mine." He withdrew at last, his boots echoing down the corridor. Only once he was gone did Alistair's shoulders drop, the strain slipping from him like snow melting off stone. "You should not have confronted him," he murmured, though admiration warmed his tone. "You should not face him alone," she replied without hesitation. Their eyes held, two souls bruised by different wounds, united by choice rather than fate. Moments later, the chapel at the far end of Ashford House filled with the soft glow of candles. The storm beat against the stained glass as though longing to witness what happened within. A minister, summoned overnight and snow-soaked from travel, stood ready with his book. Edmund waited as their witness, hands clasped, face solemn. When Lillian walked down the aisle, her simple ivory gown brushing the stone floor, Alistair's breath left him. She was not adorned like a duchess. She wore no jewels except the light that reflected from snow-dusted windows. Yet he looked at her as though she were the single, steady truth in a world made of shadows. Her hands trembled when he took them. His hands trembled more. "I once believed duty and affection could not coexist," he confessed softly, just for her. "But you have undone every certainty I ever held." Her pulse fluttered. "I once believed my life ended with my husband's passing," she whispered. "But you have given me reason to begin again." When the minister asked for their vows, the Duke's voice deepened with emotion he did not bother to hide. "I asked for a wife out of necessity," he said. "But I stand before you now as a man who cannot imagine drawing breath without you." Tears shone in Lillian's eyes, but she kept her voice steady. "I take your name not to escape hardship, but to share in your burdens, and in your hope." Their hands met, bare skin against bare skin, a touch that felt like stepping from winter into warmth. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the storm outside roared as though offering its own fierce blessing. Later, in the quiet that followed the ceremony, Alistair led her to the conservatory. Among the winter camellias, he presented her with a glass case containing the preserved rose he had given her days before. She reached into her cloak and offered him the lambskin gloves, no longer a symbol of scandal but one of acceptance. As they stepped into the snowy courtyard, the world softened around them. Snowflakes caught in Lillian's hair, melting as Alistair brushed them away. "Whatever awaits us," he whispered, "we face it together." "Together?" she echoed, her hand slipping into his. And beneath the falling snow, the Duke and Duchess of Ashford stood rooted in the knowledge that love, born of dignity, forged in trials, would be their truest inheritance.